Jeff, we're moving on to our last topic. And when I saw this last Friday, we recorded our show a week ago. This came out on Friday evening and afternoon. I was just surprised. I shouldn't be, but I couldn't believe it the way it was framed. And it's all about the central bank and that they're going to create inflation and that they're serious about it. No more games. 13 years, but now we're serious. And you wrote it. It's called Not This Again, July 17th blog post, Alhambra Investments. What prompted you to write Not This Again?
Frustration, Emil, because it's, and I know you're smiling about it, and people probably who aren't familiar with this probably won't get the joke, but it's just, this is absolutely absurd stuff. But the point is, Jay Powell is doing everything in his power to convince the world that we're going into an inflationary scenario because he realizes the deflationary pressures are so immense. He has to do anything and everything to convince you that they're going to do it this time. We mean it. We're going to print money. We're going to do everything we possibly can, and we're going to let it get out of control. And that's really what this is about, is the idea that they're saying, we really mean it this time. We're going to let it get way out of control. So you better believe us.
Jeff, you dropped out. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, super. All right, well, we'll just continue. For the audience, if I haven't been able to edit this out, there, you see it live. We're not as perfect as it may seem to you. We're not the Regis Philbin and Dick Clark that you guys imagine us to be. Jeff, let me read to you. This is the article I read from Bloomberg. It's by Tim Duy. He is a Bloomberg opinion writer, and the title was called "The Fed is Setting the Stage for Major Policy Change." And this was the subject line. Policymakers have begun talking about letting the inflation rate rise above 2%, above its 2% target. Look for a formal statement soon. Now, if you'll spare me just 30 seconds, I'm going to read this first paragraph, and I want you to hold on to your chair. Just find inner peace, okay, Jeff? I feel this is going to affect you, so I'm just giving you fair warning. Here it is, first paragraph. For the Federal Reserve, this time is really different. Having learned a hard lesson in the last recovery that don't tighten monetary policy too early, the central bank is leaning in the opposite direction. In practice, that means the Fed will not just emphasize actual inflation over forecasted inflation, but will also attempt to push the inflation rate above its 2% target. It's a whole new ballgame. Jeff, tell the audience whether you're laughing or crying.
Both. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, first of all, it's not a whole new ball game. And second of all, it's like the guy who says, I really mean it this time, after saying, I really mean it this time 15 times beforehand. One of these times he might actually really mean it. No, it's an absurd theater. It's nothing more than performance drama, and it's not a very good one. Symmetry is what we're really talking about, or what they're talking about. They call it symmetric policy. All that really means is when the economy goes through a period of undershooting the inflation target because the central banks don't know what they're doing, central banks are going to say, well, we're going to do everything we can to get inflation back up to target, but then we're going to let it run hot for a specific amount of time so that we can get not just inflation back to target, we get the whole economy reflated back to where it was before this disinflation started to show up. So it's almost price level targeting as much as rather than inflation targeting, inflation rate targeting. And what it really means is they're trying to further convince you that the near future or beyond the immediate horizon is going to be inflationary. What they're saying essentially is you don't have to worry about the central bank because we're not going to get in the way. There's nothing that's going to stop inflation this time, because last time, obviously, according to our theory, it was us who stopped the inflation. We tightened too soon. We took QE off too soon. Whatever their excuse is. So they're trying to take that away.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jeff. They took QE. They started to raise interest rates once in 2014, once again at the end of 2015. That's 7-8 years later. That's too soon. And then they started to tighten QE a couple years later, how much time do you need?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, realistically, this is all crap, and this is all, this is why we call it absurd, is they're really reaching for the excuses for why this never they're supposed to have inflation at a 2% target, which is supposed to be consistent with a healthy growing economy. We have neither the inflation at the 2% target, no matter what you think about, inflation measures, CPI, PCE, those kinds of things. We don't have that. We don't have a healthy economy. And so how do we explain that? And then we have the problem of 2020, which is this massive disruption in this dislocation in the global economy to go along with the global financial crisis #2. So we have all of these bad things stacking up against these deflationary bad things stacking up against the situation. And you can start to understand from that position why they're so adamant about trying to convince everyone inflation is going to happen. The Fed's going to do whatever it takes. And oh, by the way, we're not going to stop it. We're going to let it go. You're going to have to worry about 1970 style inflation. And the reason they want you to think that is because the alternative is really that bad. A deflationary circumstance that is what we're really facing here, what the bond market is telling us, is something that in the central banker handbook is the worst case. So they would rather tell you and risk uncontrolled inflation because that's preferable to the situation that we're actually facing right now.
Jeff, in my advanced age, I've actually become more mellow politically, and I'm more interested in pragmatism as opposed to ideology. So whenever I hear differing opinions that I don't agree with, I don't reject them offhand. But this one I just have a lot of trouble with, and I don't want to. But when earlier you mentioned the word symmetry, and for people who don't understand where that is coming from, I believe it was mid-2019 that they put into the FOMC statement, they put in that word, symmetry. And as you explained in the article, that is supposed to be a neon signal to the market. Holy Jesus, tighten your belt, inflation is coming. For this, it's like I interpret it as a delusion of grandeur. I don't want to, I want to give them credit. But do they really believe that when they added that one word, that the markets were going to jump?
Yeah, it actually was a year before that. It was May 2018. And remember June 2018, I think it was the June 2018 statement.
June 2018, yeah.
Going off, yeah. And it was in response to what had happened on May 29th, as you pointed out, in one of the earlier segments, that, what did you call it, the full dry heave of the bond market? I mean, it was a very clear deflationary signal in the bond market that showed up in the middle of what was supposed to be this acceleration in inflation and growth. Globally synchronized growth was supposed to lead to interest rates rising, and all of a sudden we had this really very sharp signal that, hey, something's wrong here. And what happened was the Fed responded to that by thinking, well, we got to do something because we just had this sharp drop in bond yields that's not consistent with the scenario that we're trying to get people to buy into. Therefore, they added the word symmetry and symmetric policy, inflationary policy, to their FOMC statement. So it basically became a standard element of policy in May of 2018, with the idea that would maybe offset some of this deflationary pressure. They would reassure the market that, yes, we're not just forecasting inflation because of the low unemployment rate and accelerating growth that we're predicting. We're actually going to let it run farther and faster because our goal now is symmetric. We're going to let it go hot for a long period of time to make up for all of the years that it wasn't hot. And that was supposed to signal to the market, oh, this really is, they really mean it this time. This really will lead to inflation because there will be nothing to stop it. And it's a complete misread of the situation because the bond market was saying, look, you're not going to even have to worry about symmetry because the inflation is never going to happen. And so the idea of adding the word symmetry as an offset to this thing that happened in May 29th was just, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's the cart before the horse, or the cart behind or the horse behind the cart, or something, however you want to call it. And again, that's why at the same time the statement was released, I believe it was June 13th, 2018, that was the day the Eurodollar futures curve inverted for the first time, because the market was saying, These guys just don't get it. They really don't get it. Here we are telling them there's something wrong in the market, and their answer is to try to reassure us that they have it right and will let it become right no matter what happens. It's completely absurd. And I think, the point for 2020 is we're doing this again. It didn't work in 2018, obviously, but now with things even worse now than they were 2 years ago, this is supposed to be some magical treatment that gets us past this major hole that we're already into.
It's weird. It's odd. And Jeff, this is one of the articles where you did and it seemed like a non sequitur. Whoever's not paying attention to you just said, oh, by the way, the bond market is at such and such a rate. Just very quickly, final question as we wrap up. Where are the bond yields today? What are they indicating about our near-term future?
Well, the bond, for a couple, maybe even a week, less than a week there, back in, I believe it was early June, perhaps. I'm going off of memory, but there was this mainstream infatuation with the fact that the yield curve had steepened and the long end had kind of started to sell off, and everybody said, "Oh God, look, it's the curve between the 5-year and the 30-year is starting to signal this exactly what Jay Powell. It's the very beginning of the inflationary pressures are starting to show up in the bond market." And it was nothing more than this tiny smallest little hiccup in yields, because markets never go in a straight line, especially on a short run basis. They move all over the place. And yet that was hyped into this major, massive thing. Well, it's interesting that you don't see any articles about the 530s anymore, because the yield curve has fallen back again. It's been distorted and flattened out. And again, nominal yields are near their lows, and in some places at their lows. The front end of the curve and the bills are flattened around 10 basis points in yield, which is a high demand for bills. So again, the bond market, and it's not just it's not just the Treasury market, it's also yields around the world, where the global bond market is saying, what inflation? You can talk about symmetry all you want. It's not possible. It's not happening.
For the audience, if you would like to participate in the show, ask us questions, please do. I promise that I read every single Twitter question, every single YouTube comment. I am not always able to respond to all of them, and I feel terrible about that, but it does help steer the show. We learn what you're interested in, and that's what this is all about, is teaching, sharing, learning, and trying to get through this difficult time together. Jeff, it was a great show. I loved it. I can't wait to do it again next week. Take care.
Thanks, Emil. Have a good weekend.